Camera not on the screen. There we go. Hello. I almost didn't want to stream tonight, honestly. It's been a bit of a emotionally taxing day. But I also didn't want to let the day take this away from me. I did end up remembering that I had just purchased some s'more cereal. And so I was eating that for a minute. Sorry. I just realized that my spouse had sent me a message. And I didn't catch it because I wasn't paying attention. Anyway, I should probably take a second and notify all of the Twitch places, the Discord things, because I didn't do that this time, and I am also an hour earlier than I normally am in terms of just you know, stuff and things. Anyway, bear with me just a sec for that. I'm also going to try really hard not to burp up everything in my body. Okay. I really miss video games. Move this to the other screen because I can do that. It works perfect. There we go. Hello. Appreciate that. Thank you for joining me. Yeah, you're doing the after stream thing. Good. Cozy. Good of you. I'm glad. If you don't mind my asking, just out of curiosity. Okay. I took a nap and immediately wanted to go back to bed, but have to be awake for our critter, sis. It's awesome that you have a critter. I mean, not that you're still sleepy. See, I add into, if you didn't mind my asking. Goodness gracious. There we go. Wow, that made my right. Woof. Wow. So that did the literal opposite. Sorry. We're not going to do that. We're not going to do that. That's fine. Okay. Are picking up where we left off, if I can remember. And so we did. We're opening the with sound. There we go. The children often spent long summer days on this lagoon, swimming or floating most of the time, playing the mermaid games in the water, and so forth. You must not think from this that the mermaids were on friendly terms with them. Buddy, I don't know what to tell you. Okay, we're gonna start. We're gonna start again. Sorry about that. Excuse me. The children often spent long summer days on this lagoon, swimming or floating most of the time, playing the mermaid games in the water, so forth. You must not think from this that the mermaids were on friendly terms with them. On the contrary, it was among Wendy's lasting regrets that all the time she was on the island, she never had a civil word from one of them. When she stole softly to the edge of the lagoon, she might see them by the score, especially on Marooner's Rock, where they loved to bask, combing out their hair in a lazy way that quite irritated her, Or she might even swim on tiptoe, as it were, to within a yard of them, but then they saw her and dived, probably splashing her with their tails, not by accident, but intentionally. They treated all the boys in the same way, except of course Peter, who chatted with them on Marooner's Rock by the hour and sat on their tails when they got cheeky. He gave Wendy one of their combs. The most haunting time at which to see them is at the turn of the moon, when they utter strange, wailing cries. But the lagoon is dangerous for mortals then, and until the evening of which we have now to tell, Wendy had never seen the lagoon by moonlight, less from fear, of course, for of course Peter would have accompanied her, than because she had strict rules about everyone being in bed by 7. She was often at the lagoon, however, on sunny days after rain, when the mermaids come up in extraordinary numbers to play with their bubbles. The bubbles of many colors made in rainbow water they treat as balls, hitting them gaily from one to another with their tails, and trying to keep them in the rainbow till they burst. The goals are at each end of the rainbow, and the keepers only are allowed to use their hands. Sometimes hundreds of mermaids will be playing in the lagoon at a time, and it is quite a pretty sight. But the moment the children tried to join in, they had to play by themselves, for the mermaids immediately disappeared. Nevertheless, we have proof that they secretly watched the interlopers and were not above taking an idea from them, for John introduced a new way of hitting the bubble, with the head instead of the hand, and the mermaid goalkeepers adopted it. This is the one mark that John has left on the Neverland. It must also have been rather pretty to see the children resting on a rock for half an hour after their midday meal. Wendy insisted on their doing this, and it had to be a real rest, even though the meal was make-believe. So they lay there in the sun, and their bodies glistened in it, while she sat beside them and looked important. It was one such day, and they were all on Marooner's Rock. The rock was not much larger than their great bed, but of course they all knew how not to take up much room, and they were dozing, or at least lying with their eyes shut, and pinching occasionally when they thought Wendy was not looking. She was very busy stitching. Hang on a second. Ouch. Okay. She was very busy stitching. While she stitched, a change came to the lagoon. Little shivers ran over it, and the sun went away, and shadows stole across the water, turning it cold. Wendy could no longer see to thread her needle, and when she looked up, the lagoon that had always hitherto been such a laughing place seemed formidable and unfriendly. It was not, she knew, that night had come, but something as dark as night had come. No, worse than that. It had not come, but it had sent that shiver through the sea to say that it was coming. What could it be? There crowded upon her all the stories she had been told of Marooner's Rock, so called because evil captains put sailors on it and leave them there to drown. They drown when the tide rises, for then it is submerged. Of course, she should have roused the children at once, not merely because of the unknown that was stalking toward them, but because it was no longer good for them to sleep on a rock grown chilly. But she was a young mother, and she did not know this. She thought, you simply must stick to your rule about half an hour after the midday meal. So, though fear was upon her, and she longed to hear male voices, she would not waken them. Even when she heard the sound of muffled oars, though her heart was in her mouth, she did not waken them. She stood over them to let them have their sleep out. Was it not brave of Wendy? It was well for the boys, then, that there was one among them who could sniff danger even in his sleep. Peter sprang erect, as wide awake as once a dog, and with one warning cry he roused the others. He stood motionless, one hand to his ear. "Pirates!" he cried. The others came closer to him. A strange smile was playing about his face, and Wendy saw it and shuddered. While that smile was on his face, no one dared address him. All they could do was to stand ready to obey. The order came sharp and incisive. "Dive!" There was a gleam of legs, and instantly the lagoon seemed deserted. Marooner's Rock stood alone in the forbidden waters, as if it itself were marooned. The boat drew nearer. It was the pirate dinghy, with 3 figures in her, Shmee and Starkey, and the third a captive, no other than Tiger Lily. Her hands and ankles were tied, and she knew what was to be her fate. She was to be left on the rock to perish, an end to one of her race more terrible than death by fire or torture. For is it not written in the book of the tribe that there is no path through water to the happy hunting ground? Yet her face was impassive. She was the daughter of a chief. She must die as a chief's daughter. It is enough. They had caught her boarding the pirate ship with a knife in her mouth. No watch was kept on the ship, it being Hook's boast that the wind of his name guarded the ship for a mile around. Now her fate would help to guard it also. One more whale would go the round in that wind by night. In the gloom that they brought with them, the 2 pirates did not see the rock till they crashed into it. "Luff, you lubber!" cried an Irish voice that was Shmee's. "Here's the rock now. Then what we have to do is to hoist the redskin onto it and leave her there to drown." It was the work of one brutal moment to land the beautiful girl on the rock. She was too proud to offer a vain resistance. Quite near the rock, but out of sight, 2 heads were bobbing up and down, Peter's and Wendy's. Wendy was crying, for it was the first tragedy she had seen. Peter had seen many tragedies, but he had forgotten them all. He was less sorry than Wendy for Tiger Lily. It was 2 against 1 that angered him, and he meant to save her. An easy way would have been to wait until the pirates had gone, but he was never one to choose the easy way. There was almost nothing he could not do, and he now imitated the voice of Hook. "Ahoy there, you lubbers!" he called. It was a marvelous imitation. "The captain!" said the pirates, staring at each other in surprise. "He must be swimming out to us," Starkey said, when they had looked for him in vain. "We are putting the redskin on the rock," Shmee called out. "Set her free," came the astonishing answer. "Free? Yes, cut her bonds and let her go." "But, Captain—" "At once, do you hear?" cried Peter. "I'll plunge my hook in you." "This is strange," Shmee gasped. "Let her do what the captain orders," said Starkey nervously. "Aye, aye," Shmee said, and he cut Tiger Lily's cords. At once, like an eel, she slid between Starkey's legs into the water. Of course, Wendy was very elated over Peter's cleverness, but she knew that he would be elated also and very likely grow and thus betray himself. so at once her hand went out to cover his mouth. But it was stayed even in the act, for "Boat ahoy!" rang over the lagoon in Hook's voice, and this time it was not Peter who had spoken. Peter may have been about to crow, but his face puckered in a whistle of surprise instead. "Boat ahoy!" Again came the cry. Now Wendy understood. The real Hook was also in the water. He was swimming to the boat, and his men showed a light to guide him. Let me try that sentence again. He was swimming to the boat, and as his men showed a light to guide him, he had soon reached them. In the light of the lantern, Wendy saw his hook grip the boat's side. She saw his evil, swarthy face as he rose dripping from the water, and, quaking, she would have liked to swim away, but Peter would not budge. He was tingling with life and also top-heavy with conceit. "Am I not a wonder? Oh, I am a wonder," he whispered to her. And though she thought so also, she was really glad, for the sake of his reputation, that no one heard him except herself. He signed to her to listen. The two pirates were very curious to know what had brought their captain to them, but he sat with his head on his hook in a position of profound melancholy. "Captain, all is well?" they asked timidly. But he answered with a hollow moan. "He sighs," said Shmi. "He sighs again," said Starkey. "And yet a third time he sighs," said Shmi. "What's up, Captain?" Then at last he spoke passionately. "The game's up," he cried. "Those boys have found a mother." Affrighted though she was, Wendy swelled with pride. "Oh, evil day!" cried Starkey. "What's a mother?" asked the ignorant Shmi. Wendy was so shocked that she exclaimed, "He doesn't know!" And always after this she felt that if you could have a pet pirate, Shmi would have been hers. Peter pulled her beneath the water, for Hook had started up, crying, "What was that?" "I heard nothing," said Starkey, raising the lantern over the waters. And as the pirates looked, they saw a strange sight. It was the nest I have told you of, floating on the lagoon, and the Never Bird was sitting on it. "See," said Hook in answer to Shmi's question. "That is a mother. What a lesson! The nest must have fallen into the water, but would the mother desert her eggs? No." There was a break in his voice, as if for a moment he recalled innocent days when but he brushed that away he brushed away this weakness with his hook. Shmi, much impressed, gazed at the bird as the nest was borne past, but the more suspicious Starkey said, "If she is a mother, perhaps she is hanging about here to help Peter." Hook winced. "Aye," he said, "that is the fear that haunts me." He was roused from this dejection by Shmi's eager voice. "Captain," said Shmi, "could we not kidnap these boys' mother and make her our mother?" "It is a princely scheme," cried Hook, and at once it took practical shape in his great brain. "We shall seize the children and carry them to the boat. The boys will walk the plank, and Wendy shall be our mother." All right. First sprint. 3-minute break. I see a few familiar names have joined the chat. Hello, everybody. It's nice to see you here. Mr. Nation, were you sleeping? Or was it just that you came late? Oh, hello, darling. It's nice to see your face and name too. don't forget to get yourself your beverages for the evening. And if you haven't yet, I can't reach my glass. Woof. If you haven't yet, make sure you've taken your meds. It is late. That tea is from last night. I never put it in the fridge, but it's okay. It's perfectly fine, I think. Yeah, I think when I connected the television by Bluetooth to the laptop, that the connection was causing it to lag a little bit, because as soon as I closed it down, everything was fine. I'm half tempted to turn it on and turn it on to the quote unquote fireplace channel because I think it would be nice. But I don't know if playing it would cause any sort of additional lag on the network. I'm going to mute myself for just a second so that if I turn the TV on, it doesn't make noise, because I think it's on a regular channel when it's first turned on. I don't want to wake up anybody who might be napping. 1 sec. Tell you what, I was absolutely correct. And that would have been really, really loud. Okay, there we go. How nice. Well, that is extremely pleasant. I actually like that. It's no fish pond swearing, but that's okay. Now, the 3-minute timer did go off, so let us continue. Again, Wendy forgot herself. Never, she cried and bobbed. What was that? But they could see nothing. They thought it must have been a leaf in the wind. Do you agree, my bullies? Asked Hook. There is my hand on it, they both said, and there is my hook. Swear. They all swore. By this time they were on the rock, and suddenly Hook remembered Tiger Lily. Where is the redskin? He demanded abruptly. He had a playful humor at moments, and they thought this was one of those moments. Oh, that is all right, Captain, Jimmy answered complacently. We'll let her go. Let her go! Cried Hook. 'Twas your orders. The boatswain faltered. You called over the water to let us to us to let her go, said Starkey. Brimstone and gall, thundered Hook. What cozening is here? His face had gone black with rage, but he saw that they believed their words. And he was startled. Lads, he said, shaking a little, I gave no such order. It is a passing odd, Shmi said, and they all fidgeted uncomfortably. Hook raised his voice, but there was a quiver in it. Spirit that haunts this dark lagoon tonight, cried, dost thou hear me? Of course Peter should have kept quiet, but of course he did not. He immediately answered in Hook's voice, Odds bobs, hammer and tongs, I hear you. In that supreme moment, Hook did not blanch, even at the gills, but Shmi and Starkey clung to each other in terror. "Who are you, stranger? Speak!" Hook demanded. "I am James Hook," replied the voice, "captain of the Jolly Roger." You are not," Hook cried hoarsely. "Brimstone and gall," the voice retorted. "Say that again and I'll cast anchor in you." Hook tried a more ingratiating manner. "If you are Hook," he said almost humbly, "come tell me, who am I?" "A codfish," replied the voice. "Only a codfish." "A codfish!" Hook echoed blankly, and it was then, but not till then, that his proud spirit broke. He saw his men draw back from him. "Have we been captained all this time by a codfish?" they muttered. "It is lowering to our pride." They were his dogs snapping at him, but, tragic figure though he had become, he scarcely heeded them. Against such fearful evidence, it was not their belief in him that he needed, it was his own. He felt his ego slipping from him. "Don't desert me, bully," he whispered hoarsely to it. In his dark nature there was a touch of the feminine, as in all the great pirates, and it sometimes gave him intuitions. Suddenly he tried the guessing game. "Hook," he called, "have you another voice?" Now Peter could never resist a game, and he answered blithely in his own voice. "I have." "And another name?" "Aye, aye." "Vegetable?" asked Hook. "No." "Mineral?" "No." "Animal?" "Yes." "Man?" "No." This answer rang out scornfully. "Boy?" "Yes." "Ordinary boy?" "No." "Wonderful boy?" To Wendy's pain, the answer that rang out this time was yes. "Are you in England?" "No." "Are you here?" "Yes." Hook was completely puzzled. "You ask him some questions," he said to the others, wiping his damp brow. Smee reflected. "I can't think of a thing," he said regretfully. Can't guess, groaned Peter. "Do you give up?" Of course, in his pride, he was carrying the game too far, and the miscreants saw their chance. "Yes, yes," they answered eagerly. "Well then," he cried, "I am Peter Pan." "Pan!" In a moment Hook was himself again, and Shmi and Starkey were his faithful henchmen. "Now we have him!" Hook shouted. "Into the water, Shmi! Starkey, mind the boat! Take him, dead or alive!" He leapt as he spoke, and simultaneously came the bright voice of Peter. "Are you ready, boys?" "Aye, aye!" from various parts of the lagoon. "Then lam into the pirates!" The fight was short and sharp. First to draw blood was John, who gallantly climbed into the boat and held Starkey. There was a fierce struggle, in which the cutlass was torn from the pirate's grasp. He wriggled overboard, and John leapt after him. The dinghy drifted away. Here and there a head bobbed up in the water, and there was a flash of steel followed by a cry or a whoop. In the confusion, some struck at their own side. The corkscrew of Shmi got Toodles in the fourth rib, but he was himself pinked in turn by Curly. Farther from the rock, Starkey was pressing slightly and the twins hard. Where all this time was Peter? He was seeking bigger game. The others were all brave boys, and they must not be blamed for backing from the pirate's captain. His iron claw made a circle of dead water round him, from which they fled like affrighted fish. But there was one who did not fear him. There was one prepared to enter that circle. Strangely, it was not in the water that they met. Hook rose to the rock to breathe, and at the same moment Peter scaled it on the opposite side. The rock was slippery as a ball, and they had to crawl rather than climb. Neither knew that the other was coming. Each feeling for a grip met the other's arm. In surprise, they raised their heads. Their faces were almost touching, so they met. Some of the greatest heroes have confessed that just before they fell to, they had a sinking. Had it been so with Peter at that moment, I would admit it. After all, this was the only man that the sea cook had feared. But Peter had no sinking. He had only one feeling, and one feeling alone: gladness. And he gnashed his pretty teeth with joy. Quick as thought, he snatched a knife from Hook's belt and was about to drive it home when he saw that he was higher up the rock than his foe. It would not have been a fair fight. He gave the pirate a hand to help him up, and it was then that Hook bit him. Not the pain of this, but the unfairness was what dazed Peter. It made him quite helpless. He could only stare, horrified. Every child is affected thus the first time he is treated unfairly. All he thinks he has a right to when he comes to you to be yours is fairness. After you have been unfair to him, he will love you again, but he will never afterwards be quite the same boy. No one ever gets over the first unfairness. No one except Peter. He often met it, but he always forgot it. I suppose that was the real difference between him and all the rest. So when he met it now, it was like the first time. He could just stare, helpless. Twice the iron hand clawed him. A few minutes afterwards, the other boy saw Hook in the water, striking wildly for the ship. No elation on his pestilent face now, only white fear, for the crocodile was in dogged pursuit of him. On ordinary occasions, the boys would have swum alongside, cheering, but now they were uneasy, for they had lost both Peter and Wendy, and were scouring the lagoon for them, calling them by name. They found the dinghy and went home in it, shouting, "Peter! Wendy!" as they went, but no answer came save mocking laughter from the mermaids. They must be swimming back or flying, the boys concluded. They were not very anxious. They had such faith in Peter. They chuckled boy-like because they would be late for bed, and it was all Mother Wendy's fault. When their voices died away, there came cold silence over the lagoon, and then a feeble cry. "Help! Help!" Two small figures were beating against the rock. The girl had fainted and lay on the boy's arm. With a last effort, Peter pulled her up the rock and then lay down beside her. Even as he also fainted, he saw that the water was rising. He knew that they would soon be drowned, but he could do no more. As they lay side by side, a mermaid caught Wendy by the feet and began pulling her softly into the water. Peter, feeling her slip from him, woke with a start and was just in time to draw her back. But he had to tell her the truth. "We are on the rock, Wendy," he said, "but it is growing smaller. Soon the water will be over it." She did not understand even now. "We must go," she said almost brightly. "Yes," he answered faintly. "Shall we swim or fly, Peter?" He had to tell her. "Do you think you could swim or fly as far as the island, Wendy, without my help?" She had to admit that she was too tired. He moaned. "What is it?" she asked, anxious about him at once. "I cannot help you, Wendy. Hook wounded me. I can neither fly nor swim." "Do you mean we shall both be drowned? Look how the water is rising." They put their hands over their eyes to shut out the sight. They thought they would soon be no more. As they sat thus, something brushed against Peter as light as a kiss and stayed there, as if saying timidly, "Can I be of any use?" It was the tail of a kite, which Michael had made some days before. It was the tail of a kite which Michael had made some days before. It had torn itself out of his hands and floated away. "Michael's kite," Peter said without interest. But next moment he had seized the tail and was pulling the kite toward him. "It lifted Michael off the ground," he cried. "Why should it not carry you? Both of us." "It can't lift two. Michael and Curly tried." "Let us draw lots," Wendy said bravely. "And you a lady? Never." Already he had tied the tail around her. She clung to him. She refused to go without him, but with a "Goodbye, Wendy," he pushed her from the rock, and in a few minutes she was borne out of his sight. Peter was alone on the lagoon. The rock was very small now. Soon it would be submerged. Pale rays of light tiptoed across the water, and by there was to be heard a sound at once the most musical and the most melancholy in the world, the mermaids calling to the moon. Peter was not quite like other boys, but he was afraid at last. A tremor ran through him like a shudder passing over the sea. But on the sea, one shudder follows another till there are hundreds of them, and Peter felt just the one. Next moment he was standing erect on the rock again with a smile on his face and a drum beating within him. It was saying, to die would be an awfully big adventure. Chapter 8. The Never Bird. The last sounds Peter heard before he was quite alone were the mermaids retiring one by one to their bedchambers under the sea. He was too far away to hear their doors shut, but every door in the coral caves where they live rings a tiny bell when it opens or closes, as in all the nicest houses on the mainland, and he heard the bells. Steadily the waters rose till they were nibbling at his feet, and to pass the time until they made their final gulp, he watched the only thing moving on the lagoon. He thought it was a piece of floating paper, perhaps part of the kite, and wondered idly how long it would take to drift ashore. Presently he noticed as an odd thing that it was undoubtedly out upon the lagoon with some definite purpose, for it was fighting the tide and sometimes winning, and when it won, Peter, always sympathetic to the weaker side, could not help clapping. It was such a gallant piece of paper. It was not really a piece of paper. It was the Never Bird, making desperate efforts to reach Peter on her nest. By working her wings in a way she had learned since the nest fell into the water, she was able to some extent to guide her strange craft. But by the time Peter recognized her, she was very exhausted. She had come to save him, to give him her nest, though there were eggs in it. I rather wonder at the bird, for though he had been nice to her, he had also sometimes tormented her. I can suppose only that, like Mrs. Darling and the rest of them, she was melted because he had his first teeth. She called out to him what she had come for, and he called out to her what she was doing there. But of course neither of them understood the other's language. All right, another little break. Hello, Devian. Thank you for joining us. How's everybody doing? Are you comfy and cozy? I hope you are. It is very important to be comfy and cozy when you are listening to a bedtime story. I have the worst kink in my neck right now. On both sides. It's not nice. I think I might have already said that, but it still is the truth. On the Halloween overlay. Awesome. That's great, Cozy. Yes, thank you, Kofi. As a side note, with regards to Kofi, since I don't have, I'm not affiliate yet, Fingers crossed that very soon changes. I'm so, so, so close. But if you have any requests or anything like that, you're welcome to go to the Ko-fi page and do a donation or a tip. I'll get an alert that tells me that I got one. But if that's not really your thing, that's okay. No pressure. There's also affiliate links down in the About section underneath the Twitch website that if you wanted a copy of Peter Pan or Peter Pan and Wendy in Kensington Gardens or any of the other books that we read, to get a copy from any of those websites, it gives me a small portion of the payment, and anything like that would be very helpful and useful for me. Gives me a chance to be able to do other things. I've got a couple different books that I'm going to be reading pretty soon. There's one that I'm going to start reading during daytime hours that's at regular volume rather than bedtime volume. I'm good. Playing a game with distribution, but enjoying listening. That's great. That's great. I'm glad that you're both enjoying it. Are you using the same speaker, or is it a case of you're both wearing headphones? I guess it doesn't matter. All right. 3 minutes is up. Let us continue. In fanciful stories, people can talk to the birds freely. And I wish for a moment I could pretend that this was such a story and say that Peter replied intelligently to the Never Bird, but the truth is best, and I want to tell you only what really happened. Ah, gotcha. Well, not only could they not understand each other, but they forgot their manners. I want you to get into the nest, the bird called, speaking as slowly and distinctly as possible. And then you can drift to shore, but I am too tired to bring it to any nearer. So you must swim to it. What are you quacking about? Peter answered. Why don't you let the nest drift as usual? I want you, the bird said, and repeated it all over. Then Peter tried, slow and distinct. What are you quacking about? And so on. The Never Bird became irritated. They have very short tempers. You dunderhead little jay, she screamed. Why don't you do as I tell you? Peter felt that she was calling him names, and at a venture he retorted hotly, So are you! Then rather curiously, they both snapped out the same remark. Shut up! Nevertheless, the bird was determined to save him if she could, and by one last mighty effort she propelled the nest against the rock. Then up she flew, deserting her eggs so as to make her meaning clear. Then at last Peter understood, and clutching the nest, he waved his thanks to the bird as she fluttered overhead. It was not to receive his thanks, however, that she hung there in the sky. It was not even to watch him get into the nest. It was to see what he did with her eggs. There were 2 large white eggs, and Peter lifted up and reflected. The bird covered her face with her wings so as not to see the last of her eggs, but she could not help peeping through the feathers. I forget whether I have told you that there was a stave on the rock, driven into it by some buccaneers of long ago to mark the site of buried treasure. The children had discovered the glittering hoard, and when in mischievous mood used to fling showers of mortaries, diamonds, pearls, and pieces of eight to the gulls, who pounced on them for food and then flew away, raging at the scurvy trick that had been played upon them. The stave was still there, and on it Starkey had hung his hat, a deep tarpaulin, watertight with a broad rim. Peter put the eggs into this hat and set it on the lagoon. It floated beautifully. The Never bird saw at once what he was up to, and screamed her admiration of him, and alas, Peter crowed Peter crowed his agreement with her. Then he got into the nest, reared the stave in it as a mast, and hung up his shirt for a sail. At the same moment the bird fluttered down upon the hat, and once more she sat snugly on her eggs. She drifted in one direction, and he was borne off in another, both cheering. Of course, when Peter landed, he breeched his bark in a place where the bird would easily find it. But the hat was such a great success that she abandoned the nest. It drifted about till it went to pieces, and often Starkey came to the shore of the lagoon, and with many bitter feelings watched the bird sitting on his hat. As we shall not see her again, it may be worth noting here that all Never birds now build in the shape of nests with a broad brim on which the youngsters take an airing. Great were the rejoicings when Peter reached the home under the ground, almost as soon as Wendy, who had been carried hither and thither by the kite. Every boy had adventures to tell, but perhaps the biggest adventure of all was that they were several hours late for bed. This so inflated them that they did various dodgy things to get to stay up a little longer, such as demanding bandages, but Wendy, though glorying in having them all home again safe and sound, was scandalized by the lateness of the hour, and cried, to bed, in a voice that had to be obeyed. Next day, however, she was awfully tender, and gave out bandages to every one, and they played till bedtime at limping about and carrying their arms in slings. Chapter 10. The Happy Home. One important result of the rush on the lagoon was that it made the natives their friends. Peter had saved Tiger Lily from a dreadful fate, and now there was nothing she and her braves would not do for him. All night they sat above, keeping watch over the home under the ground and awaiting the big attack by the pirates, which obviously could not be much longer delayed. Even by day they hung about, smoking the pipe of peace and looking almost as if they wanted tidbits to eat. They called Peter the Great White Father, prostrating themselves before him, and he liked this tremendously, so that it was not really good for him. "The Great White Father," he would say to them in a very lordly manner, as they grovelled at his feet, "is glad to see the Pickaninny warriors protecting his wigwam from pirates." "Me Tiger Lily," that lovely creature would reply. "Peter Pan saves me. Me his very nice friend. Me no let pirates hurt him." She was far too pretty to cringe in this way, but Peter thought it his due, and he would answer condescendingly, "It is good. Peter Pan has spoken." Always when he said Peter Pan has spoken, it meant that they must now shut up, and they accepted it humbly in that spirit, but they were by no means respectful to the other boys, whom they looked upon as just ordinary braves. They'd say, "How do" to them, and things like that, and what annoyed the boys was that Peter seemed to think this all right. Secretly, Wendy sympathized with them a little, but she was far too loyal a housewife to listen to any complaints against Father. "Father knows best," she always said, "whatever her private opinion must be." Her private opinion was that the natives should not call her a squaw. We have now reached the evening that was to be known among them as the Night of Nights. because of its adventures and their upshot. The day, as if quietly gathering its forces, had been almost uneventful, and now the natives in their blankets were at their posts above, while below the children were having their evening meal, all except Peter, who had gone out to get the time. The way you got the time on the island was to find the crocodile and then stay near her till the clock struck. This meal happened to be a make-believe tea, and they sat round the board guzzling in their greed, and really, what with their chatter and recriminations, the noise, as Wendy said, was positively deafening. To be sure, she did not mind noise, but she simply would not have them grabbing things and then excusing themselves by saying that Toodles had pushed their elbow. There was a fixed rule that they must never hit back at meals, but should refer the matter of dispute to Wendy by raising the right arm politely and saying, "I complain if so-and-so." But what usually happened was that they forgot to do this or did it too much. "Silence!" cried Wendy, when for the 12th time she had told them that they were not all to speak at once. "Is your calabash empty, Slightly, darling?" "Not quite empty, Mummy," Slightly said, after looking into an imaginary mug. "He hasn't even begun to drink his milk," Nibs interposed. This was telling, and Slightly seized his chance. I complain of Nibs," he cried promptly. John, however, had held up his hand first. "Well, John, may I sit in Peter's chair as he is not here?" "Sit in father's chair, John." Wendy was scandalized. "Certainly not." "He is not really our father," John answered. "He didn't even know how a father does till I showed him." This was grumbling. "We complain of John," cried the twins. Toodles held up his hand. He was so much the humblest of them, indeed he was the only humble one, that Wendy was especially gentle with him. "I don't suppose," Toodles said diffidently, "that I could be father." "No, Toodles." Once Toodles began, which was not very often, he had a silly way of going on. "As I can't be father," he said heavily, "I don't suppose, Michael, that you would let me be baby?" "No, I won't," Michael rapped out. He was already in his basket. "As if I can't be baby," Toodles said, getting heavier and heavier. "Do you think I could be a twin?" "No, indeed," replied the twins. "It's awfully difficult to be a twin." "As I can't be anything important," said Toodles, "would any of you like to see me do a trick?" "No," they all replied. Then at last he stopped. "I hadn't really any hope," he said. The hateful telling broke out again. "Slightly is coughing on the table. The twins began with Mamie apples. Curly is taking both tapa rolls and yams. Nibs is speaking with his mouth full. I complain of the twins. I complain of Curly. I complain of Nibs." Oh dear, cried Wendy. "I'm sure I sometimes think that children are more trouble than they are worth." She told them to clear away and sat down to her work basket, a heavy load of stockings and every knee with a hole in it as usual. "Wendy," remonstrated Michael, "I'm too big for a cradle." "I must have somebody in a cradle," she said almost tartly, "and you are the littlest. A cradle is such a nice homely thing to have about a house." While she sewed, they played around her, such a group of happy faces and dancing limbs lit up by that romantic fire. It had become a very familiar scene in this home under the ground, but we are looking on it for the last time. There was a step above, and Wendy, you may be sure, was first to recognize it. "Children, I hear your father's step. He likes you to meet him at the door." Above it, the natives crouched before Peter. "Watch well, braves, I have spoken." And then, as so often before, the gay children dragged him from his tree, and so often before, but never again. He had brought nuts for the boys as well as the correct time for Wendy. "Peter, you just spoil them, you know," Wendy simpered. "Ah, old lady," said Peter, hanging up his gun. "It was me told him mothers are called old lady," Michael whispered to Curly. "I complain of Michael," said Curly instantly. The first twin came to Peter. "Father, we want to dance." "Dance away, my little man," said Peter, who was in high good humor. "But we want you to dance." Peter was really the best dancer among them, but he pretended to be scandalized. "Me? My old bones would rattle. And Mummy too." "What?" cried Wendy. "The mother of such an armful! Dance!" "But on a Saturday night," slightly insinuated. It was not really Saturday night. At least it may have been, for they had long lost count of the days. But always, if they wanted to do anything special, they said this was Saturday night, and then they did it. "Of course it is Saturday night, Peter," Wendy said, relenting. "People of our figure, Wendy. But it is only among our own progeny." "True, true." So they were told they could dance, but they must put on their nighties first. "Ah, old lady," Peter said aside to Wendy, warming himself by the fire and looking down at her as she sat turning a heel. "There's nothing more pleasant of an evening for you and me when the day's toil is over than to rest by the fire with the little ones nearby." Time for another break. Drink, drink, drink my water. This is very domestic, and I don't know that I can recall in any of the versions of the films that I've seen that it's ever been this domestic. Good, 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 Eremy. It's important to have a sip of water every so often. Doesn't have to be a gulp, just a sip. And tell your dear partner that they not to be drinking a sip as well if they're not listening more attentively. Yeah, exactly, exactly. I think it's cute though. Obviously, this is meant to be like foreboding, you know? But I think it's cute. And honestly, if I have never been present for a group of rowdy kids who are all cousins and brothers and sisters just tattling on each other back and forth all night, that is just so correct. And Toodle is such a pick-me. Oh, poor Toodles. Oh my gosh. I wonder if my muscle cream is downing. Or did I bring it upstairs? Piffle, I think I did bring it upstairs. It's annoying. Yeah. Oh man. I remember when I was a kid, when we would go to like family reunions, I was usually one of the older kids. Like all the other kids were much younger than me. but it was almost exactly the same. And because I was older, I was the more responsible one. So I had to set an example and all that other crap. I always hated having to freaking be a better example. I just charged. Charged what? Sorry, I did not mean for that to sound so grab. What did you just charge? I was usually the youngest, says Amira. Yeah, it's not one or the other, right? Okay. Alright, the alarm went off, so it's time to continue. We are at 1 hour and 22 minutes. Chugged like 1/3 of my water bottle for you. Brava! Brava, little darling. Alrighty. Let us continue. Oh, you just brought up something just then. Oh, you brought up something just then. What did I bring up? The sibling thing, see? I'm giving you like 1 minute, so hopefully the lag isn't so bad that I can't see what your next response is too quickly. What doesn't help? Now you won't say it in chat as it's not good. Got it. Okay. I'll look in Discord in a little bit. I'm gonna take a break after this sprint to go upstairs and use the bathroom. But I can hold it a little bit longer, 15 minutes. It's not that long. Anyway, it is sweet, Peter, isn't it? Wendy said, frightfully gratified. Peter, I think Curly has your nose. Michael takes after you. She went on. She went to him and put her hand on his shoulder. Dear Peter, she said, with such a large family, of course. I have now passed my best, but you don't want to change me, do you? No, Wendy. Certainly he did not want a change, but he looked at her uncomfortably, blinking, like one of them, not sure whether he was awake or asleep. Peter, what is it? I was just thinking, he said, a little scared. Is it only make-believe? It is only make-believe, isn't it, that I'm their father? Oh, yes, Wendy said primly. You see, he continued apologetically, it would make me seem so old to be their real father. But they are ours, Peter, yours and mine. But not really, Wendy, he asked anxiously. Not if you don't wish it, she replied, and she distinctly heard. What the hell was that? I thought I had my shit on mute. Sorry. Not if you don't wish it, she replied, and she distinctly heard his sigh of relief. Peter, she asked, trying to speak firmly, what are your exact feelings for me? Those of a devoted son, Wendy. I thought so, she said, and went and sat by herself at the extreme end of the room. You are so strange, he said, frankly puzzled. And tell your Lily is just the same. There's something she wants to be to me, but she says it's not my mother. No, indeed, it's not, Wendy said with frightful emphasis. Now we know why she was prejudiced against the natives. Then what is it? It isn't for a lady to tell. Oh, very well, Peter said, a little nettled. Perhaps Tinkerbell will tell me. Oh, yes, Tinkerbell will definitely tell you, Wendy retorted scornfully. She is an abandoned little creature. Oh, maybe. Here, Tink was in her boudoir eavesdropping, squeaked out something impudent. She said she glories in being abandoned, Peter interpreted. He had a sudden idea. Perhaps Tink wants to be my mother." "You silly ass!" cried Tinker Bell in a passion. She had said it so often that Wendy needed no translation. "I almost agree with her," Wendy snapped. Fancy Wendy snapping! But she had been much tried, and she little knew what was to happen before the night was out. If she had known, she would not have snapped. None of them knew. Perhaps it was best not to know. Their ignorance gave them one more glad hour, and as it was to be their last hour on the island, let us rejoice that there were 60 glad minutes in it. They sang and danced in their nightgowns. Such a deliciously creepy song it was, in which they pretended to be frightened at their own shadows, little witting that so soon shadows would close in upon them, from whom they would shrink in real fear. So uproariously happy was the dance, and how they buffeted each other on the bed out of it and out of it. It was a pillow fight rather than a dance, and when it was finished, the pillows insisted on one bout more, like partners who know that they may never meet again. Stories they told before it was time for Wendy's good-night story. Even Slightly tried to tell a story that night, but the beginning was so fearfully dull that it appalled even himself, and he said gloomily, "Yes, it is a dull beginning. I say, let us pretend that it is the end." Then at last they all got into bed for Wendy's story, the story they loved best, the story Peter hated. Usually, when she began to tell this story, he left the room or put his hands over his ears. And possibly if he had done either of those things this time, they might all still be on the island. But tonight he remained on his stool, and we shall see what happens. Chapter 11, Wendy's Story. "Listen, then," said Wendy, settling down to her story, with Michael at her feet and 7 boys in the bed. "There was once a gentleman—" "I had rather he had been a lady," Curly said. "I wish he had been a white rat," said Nibs. "Hush now," their mother admonished them. "There was a lady also, and—" "Oh, Mummy," cried the first twin, "you mean that there is a lady also, don't you? She's not dead, is she?" "Oh, no. I am awfully glad she isn't dead," said Toodles. "Are you glad, John?" "Of course I am." "Are you glad, Nibs?" "Rather. Are you glad, twins?" "We are just glad." "Oh, dear," sighed Wendy. "Little less noise there," Peter called out, determined that she should have fair play, however beastly a story it might be in his opinion. "The gentleman's name," Wendy continued, "was Mr. Darling, and her name was Mrs. Darling." "I knew them," John said, to annoy the others. "I think I knew them," said Michael rather doubtfully. "They were married, you know," explained Wendy. "And what do you think they had?" "White rats!" cried Nips, inspired. "No, it's awfully puzzling," said Toodles, who knew the story by heart. "Quiet, Toodles. They had 3 descendants." "What is descendants?" "Well, you are one, twin." "Do you hear that, John? I am a descendant." "Descendants are only children," said John. Oh dear," sighed Wendy. "Now, these 3 children had a faithful nurse called Nana, but Mr. Darling was angry with her and chained her up in the yard, and so all the children flew away." "It's an awful good story," said Nibs. "They flew away," Wendy continued, "to the Neverland, where the lost children are." "I just thought they did," Curly broke in excitedly. "I don't know how it is, but I just thought they did." "Oh, Wendy," cried Toodles, "was one of the lost children called Toodles?" "Yes, he was." "I'm in the story! Hurrah, I'm in the story, Nibs!" "Hush. Now I want you to consider the feelings of the unhappy parents with all their children flown away. Oh, they all moaned, though they were not really considering the feelings of the unhappy parents one jot. Think of the empty beds. Oh, it's awful sad, the first twin said cheerfully. I don't see how it can have a happy ending, said the second twin. Do you, Nips? I'm frightfully anxious. If you knew how great it is. Mother's love, Wendy told them triumphantly. You would have no fear. She had now come to the part that Peter hated. I do like a mother's love, said Toodles, hitting Nibs with a pillow. Do you like mother's love, Nibs? I do just, said Nibs, hitting back. You see, Wendy said complacently, our heroine knew that the mother would always leave the window open for her children to fly back. So they stayed away for years and had a very lovely time. Did they ever go back? Let us now, said Wendy, bracing herself for her finest effort, take a peep into the future. And they all gave themselves the twist that makes peeps into the future easier. Years have rolled by, and who is this elegant lady of uncertain age alighting at London Station? Oh, Wendy, who is she? Cried Nips, every bit as excited as he didn't know. Can it be? Yes, no. It is the fair Wendy. Oh, and who are the two noble portly figures accompanying her now grown to a man's estate? Can they be John and Michael? They are. Oh, see, dear brothers, says the Wendy, pointing upwards. There is the window still standing open. Oh, and now we are rewarded for our sublime faith in mother's love. So up they flew to their mummy and daddy, and pen cannot describe the happy scene over which we draw a veil. That was the story, and they were as pleased with it as the fair narrator herself. Everything just as it should be, you see. Off we skip, like the most heartless things in the world, which is what children are, but so attractive, and we have an entirely selfish time. And then we have need of special attention. We nobly return for it, confident that we shall be embraced instead of smacked. So great indeed was their faith in a mother's love that they felt they could afford to be callous for a little bit longer. But there was one there who knew better, and when Wendy finished, he uttered a hollow groan. What is it, Peter? She cried, rushing to him, thinking he was ill. She felt him solicitously lowered down than his chest. Where is it, Peter? It isn't that kind of pain, Peter replied darkly. Then what kind is it? Wendy, you are wrong about mothers. They all gathered round him affright. So alarming was his agitation, and with a fine candor he told them what he had hitherto concealed. Long ago, he said, I thought like you, that my mother would always keep the window open for me. So I stayed away for moons and moons and moons, and then flew back. But the window was barred, for mother had forgotten all about me, and there was another little boy sleeping in my bed. I am not sure that this was true, but Peter thought it was true, and it scared them. Are you sure mothers are like that? Yes. So this was the truth about mothers. The toads. Still, it is best to be careful, and no one knows so quickly as a child when he should give in. Wendy, let's go home, cried John and Michael together. Yes, she said, clutching them. Not tonight, pressed the lost voice, bewildered. They knew in what they called their hearts that one can get on quite well without a mother, and that it is only the mothers who think you can't. At once, Wendy replied resolutely, for the horrible thought had come to her. Perhaps mother is in half mourning by this time. The dread made her forgetful of what must be Peter's feelings, and she said to him rather sharply, Peter, will you make the necessary arrangements? If you wish it, he replied, as coolly as if she had asked him to pass the nuts. not so much as a sorry to lose you between them. If she did not mind the parting, he was going to show her, was Peter, that neither did he. But of course he cared very much, and he was so full of wrath against grown-ups who, as usual, were spoiling everything, that as soon as he got inside his tree, he breathed intentionally quick, short breaths at the rate of about 5 to a second. He did this because there is a saying in Neverland that every time you breathe, a grown-up dies, and Peter was killing them off vindictively as fast as possible. Then, having given the necessary instruction to the natives, he returned to the home where an unworthy scene had been enacted in his absence. Panic-stricken at the thought of losing Wendy, the Lost Boys had advanced upon her threateningly. "It will be worse than before she came," they cried. "We shan't let her go. Let's keep her prisoner. Aye, chain her up." In her extremity, an instinct told her to which of them to turn. "Toodles," she cried, "I appeal to you." Was it not strange? She appealed to Toodles, quite the silliest one. Grandly, however, did Toodles respond. For that one moment he dropped his silliness and spoke with dignity. "I am just Toodles," he said, "and nobody minds me. But the first who does not behave to Wendy like an English gentleman, I will blood him severely." He drew his hanger, and for that instant his sun was at noon. The others held back uneasily. Then Peter returned, and they saw at once that they would get no support from him. He would keep no girl in the Neverland against her will. "Wendy," he said, striding up and down, "I have asked the natives to guide you through the wood, as flying tires you so. Thank you, Peter." All right, time for another little break. And I'm going to go run off to the bathroom, so I'll be right back. Don't go anywhere. Okay, I am back. I brought my cream with me real quick so that I could put some on my sore spots. Oh boy. The only down is that it smells very strongly of menthol. And that's not normally a bad thing, but it's like right here up in my face. Oh, okie dokie. Getting up the alarm. Oops. There we go. Then Peter continued in the short, sharp voice of one accustomed to be obeyed. Tinker Bell will take you across the sea. Wake her, Nibs. Nibs had to knock twice before he got an answer, though Tink had really been sitting up in bed listening for some time. Who are you? How dare you? Go away, she cried. You are to get up, Tink, Nibs called, and take Wendy on a journey. Of course, Tink had been delighted to hear that Wendy was going, but she was jolly well determined not to be her courier. She said so in still more offensive language. Then she pretended to be asleep again. She says she won't, Nibs exclaimed, aghast at such insubordination, whereupon Peter went sternly toward the young lady's chamber. Tink, he rapped out, if you don't get up and get dressed at once, I will open the curtains, and then we shall all see you in your negligee. This made her leap up to the floor. Who said I wasn't getting up? She cried. In the meantime, the boys were gazing very forlornly at Wendy, now equipped with John and Michael for the journey. By this time, they were dejected not merely because they were about to lose her, but also because they felt that she was going off to something nice to which they had not been invited. Novelty was beckoning to them as usual. Crediting them with a nobler feeling, Wendy melted. Dear ones, she said, if you will all come with me, I feel almost sure I can get my father and mother to adopt you. The invitation wasn't meant specifically for Peter, especially for Peter, but each of the boys was thinking exclusively of himself, and at once they jumped with joy. But won't they think us rather a handful? Nibs asked in the middle of his jump. Oh, no, said Wendy, rapidly thinking it out. It will only mean having a few beds in the drawing room. They can be hidden behind screens on first Thursdays. Peter, can we go? They all cried imploringly. They took it for granted that if they went, he would go also. But really, they scarcely cared. Thus children are ever ready, when novelty knocks, to desert their dearest ones. All right, Peter replied with a bitter smile, and immediately they rushed to get their things. And now, Peter, Wendy said, thinking she had put everything right, I am going to give you your medicine before you go. She loved to give them medicine, and undoubtedly gave them too much. Of course, it was only water, but it was out of a calabash, and she always shook the calabash and counted the drops, which gave a certain medicinal quality. On this occasion, however, she did not give Peter his draught, for just as she had prepared it, she saw a look on his face that made her heart sink. Get your things, Peter, she cried, shaking. No, he answered, pretending indifference. I am not going with you, Wendy. Yes, Peter. No. To show that her departure would mean To show that her departure would leave him unmoved, he skipped up and down the room, playing gaily on his heartless pipes. She had to run about after him, though it was rather undignified. "To find your mother," she coaxed. Now, if Peter had ever quite had a mother, he had no longer missed her. He could do very well without one. He had thought them out, and remembered only their bad points. "No, no," he told Wendy decisively. "Perhaps she was say I was old, and I just want always to be a little boy and to have fun. But Peter, no." So the others had to be told. "Peter isn't coming. Peter not coming." They gazed blankly at him, their sticks over their backs, and on each stick a little bundle. Their first thought was that Peter was not going. He had probably changed his mind about letting them go, but he was far too proud for that. "If you find your mothers," he said darkly, "I hope you will like them." The awful cynicism of this made an uncomfortable impression, and most of them began to look rather doubtful. After all, their faces said, were they not noodles to go to want to go? "Now then," cried Peter, "no fuss, no blubbering. Goodbye, Wendy." And he held out his hand cheerily, quite as if they must really go now, for he had something important to do. She had to take his hand, as there was no indication that he would prefer a thimble. "You will remember about changing your flannels, Peter," she said, lingering over him. He was always so particular about their flannels. "Yes." "And you will take your medicine." "Yes." That seemed to be everything, and an awkward pause followed. Peter, however, was not the kind that breaks down before people. "Are you ready, Tinker Bell?" he called out. "Aye, aye." "Then lead the way." Tinker Bell darted up the nearest tree, but no one followed her, for it was at this moment that the pirates made their dreadful attack upon the natives. Above, where all had been so still, the air was rent with shrieks and the clash of steel. Below, there was dead silence. Mouths opened and remained open. Wendy fell on her knees, but her arms were extended toward Peter. All arms were extended to him, as if suddenly blown in his direction. They were beseeching him mutely not to desert them. As for Peter, he seized his sword, the same he thought he had slain Barbecue with, and the lust of battle was in his eyes. Chapter 12. The children are carried off. The pirate attack had been a complete surprise, a sure proof that the unscrupulous Hook had conducted it improperly, for to surprise natives barely is beyond the wit of a white man. By all the unwritten laws of savage warfare, it is always the natives who attack, and with the willingness of his race he does it just before the dawn, at which time he knows the courage of the whites to be at its lowest ebb. The white men have in the meantime made a rude stockade on the summit of yonder undulating ground, at the foot of which a stream runs, for it is destruction to be too far from water. There they await the onslaught, the inexperienced ones clutching their revolvers and treading on twigs, but the old hands sleeping tranquilly until just before dawn. Through the long black night, the native scouts wriggle snake-like among the grass without stirring a blade. The brushwood closes behind them as silent as sand, into which a mole has dived. Not a sound is to be heard, save when they give vent to a wonderful imitation of the lonely call of the coyote. The cry is answered by another brave, and some of them do even better than the coyotes who are not very good at it. So the chill hours wear on, and the long suspense is horribly trying to the paleface, who has to live through it for the first time. But to the trained hand, those ghastly calls and still ghastlier silences are but an imitation of how the night is marching. That this was the usual procedure was so well known to Hook that in disregarding it he cannot be excused on the plea of ignorance. The pickaninnies on their part, trusted implicitly to his honor, and their whole action of the night stands out in marked contrast to his. They left nothing undone that was consistent with the reputation of their tribe, with that alertness of the senses which is at once the marvel and despair of civilized people. They knew that the pirates were on the island from the moment one of them trod on a tri-stick, and in an incredibly short space of time the coyotes cry again. Every foot of ground between the spot where Hook had landed and his forces and the home under the trees was stealthily examined by braves wearing their moccasins with the heels in front. They found only one hillock with a stream at its base, so that Hook had no choice. Here he must establish himself and wait for just before dawn. Everything begin, everything being thus mapped out with almost diabolical cunning. The main body of the natives folded their blankets around them, and in the phlegmatic manner that is to them the pearl of manhood, squatted above the children's home, awaiting the cold moment when they should deal pale death. Here dreaming, though wide awake, of the exquisite tortures to which they were to put him at break of day, those confiding savages were found by the treacherous Hook. From the accounts afterwards supplied by such of the scouts as escaped the carnage, he does not seem even to have paused at the rising ground, though it is certain that in that grey light he must have seen it. No thought of waiting to be attacked appears from first to last to have visited his subtle mind. He would not even hold off till the night was nearly spent. On he pounded with no policy but to fall to. What could the bewildered scouts do, masters as they were of every warlike artifice save this one, but trot helplessly after him, exposing themselves fatally to view, the while they gave pathetic utterances to the coyote cry. Around the brave Tiger Lily were a dozen of her stoutest warriors, and they suddenly saw the perfidious pirates bearing down upon them. Fell from their eyes then the film through which they had looked at victory. No more would they torture at the stake. For them the happy hunting grounds now. They knew it, but as their father's sons they acquitted themselves. Even then they had time to gather in a phalanx that would have been hard to break had they risen quickly, but this they were forbidden to do by the tradition of their tribe. It is written that the noble native must never express surprise in the presence of a white man. Thus terrible as the sudden appearance of the pirates must have been to them, they remained stationary for a moment, not a muscle moving, as if the foe had come by invitation. Then indeed the tradition gallantly upheld, they seized their weapons, and the air was torn with war cry. But it was now too late. It is no part of ours to describe what was a massacre rather than a fight. Thus perished many of the flower of the Pickaninny tribe. Not all unavenged did they die, for with Lean Wolf fell Alf Mason to disturb the Spanish Main no more. And among others who bit the dust were Geo, Scory, Cass Turley, and the Alsatian Fogarty. Turley fell to the tomahawk of the terrible Panther, who ultimately cut a way through the pirates with Tiger Lily and a small remnant of the tribe. To what extent Hook is to blame for his tactics on this occasion is for the historian to decide. Had he waited on the rising ground till the proper hour, he and his men would probably have been butchered, and in judging him it is only fair to take this into account. What he should perhaps have done was to acquaint his opponents that he proposed to follow a new method. On the other hand, this, as destroying the element of surprise, would have made his strategy of no avail, so that the whole question is beset with difficulties. One cannot at least withhold a reluctant admiration for the wit that had conceived so bold a scheme, and the fell genius with which it was carried out. What were his own feelings about himself at that triumphant moment? Fain would his dogs have known, as breathing heavily and wiping their cutlasses, they gathered at a discreet distance from his hook, and squinted through their ferret eyes at this extraordinary man. Elation must have been in his heart, but his face did not reflect it. Ever a dark and solitary enigma, he stood aloof from his followers in spirit as in substance. The night's work was not yet over, for it was not the natives he had come to destroy. They were but bees to be smoked out, so that he could get at the honey. It was Pan he wanted, Pan and Wendy and their band, but chiefly Pan. Peter was such a small boy that one tends to wonder at the man's hatred of him. True, he had flung the hook's arm to the crocodile, but even this, and the increased insecurity of life to which it led, owing to the crocodile's pertinacity, hardly accounted for a vindictiveness so relentless and malignant. The truth is that there was a something about Peter which goaded the pirate captain to frenzy. It was not his courage, it was not his engaging appearance, it was not. There's no beating about the bush, for we know quite well what it was, and have got to tell. It was Peter's cockiness. Time for a break. Oh boy. Let me check out the Discord really quick. Okay. Of course he did, Z. Of course he did. What a bastard. That's good, Amira. Or Arame, excuse me. That's good. I would just really like it for my stupid neck to release the tension that's in it. Oh, we're getting to the very, very spicy time in the story. I'm getting really into it and I'm struggling not to finish. We are at 64% of the story so far, so we're just a little bit over halfway. Okay. I just had what do you call it? Like the letters flipped around in my head. It's not dyslexia because it's not something I experience all the time, just occasionally. I'm a lot worse for dyscalculia. Like, I think genuinely that I have dyscalculia because I fuck numbers up all the time. Okay. Back to it. A couple sips of my water first. Excuse me. I know you have that thing. It was Peter's cockiness. This had got on Hook's nerve. It made his iron claw twitch, and at night it disturbed him like an insect. While Peter lived, the tortured man felt that he was a lion in a cage to which a sparrow had come. The question now was how to get down the trees, or how to get his dogs down. He ran his greedy eyes over them, searching for the thinnest ones. They wriggled uncomfortably, for they knew he would not scruple to ram them down with poles. In the meantime, what of the boys? We have seen them at the first clang of weapons, turned as it were into stone figures, open-mouthed, all appealing with outstretched arms to Peter. And we return to them as their mouths close and their arms fall to their sides. The pandemonium above has ceased almost as suddenly as it arose, passed like a fierce gust of wind, but they know that in the passing it has determined their fate. Which side had won? The pirates, listening avidly at the mouths of the trees, heard the question put by every boy, and alas, they also heard Peter's answer. If the natives have won, he said, they will beat the tom-tom. It is always their sign of victory. Now Shmi had found the tom-tom and was at that moment sitting on it. You'll never hear the tom-tom again, he muttered, but inaudibly, of course, for strict silence had been enjoined. To his amazement, Hook signed to him to beat the tom-tom, and slowly there came to Shmi an understanding of the dreadful wickedness of the order. Never, probably, had this simple man admired Hook so much. Twice Shmi beat upon the instrument, and then stopped to listen gleefully. The tom-tom, the miscreants heard Peter cry. An Indian victory! The doomed children answered with a cheer that was music to the black hearts above, and almost immediately they repeated their goodbyes to Peter. This puzzled the pirates, but all their other feelings were swallowed by a base delight that the enemy were about to come up the trees. They smirked at each other and rubbed their hands. Rapidly and silently Hook gave the orders, one man to each tree, and the others to arrange themselves in a line 2 yards apart. Chapter 13. Do you believe in fairies? The more quickly this horror is disposed of, the better. The first to emerge from his tree was Curly. He rose out of it into the arms of Jekko, who flung him to Shmi, who flung him to Starkey, who flung him to Bill Jukes, who flung him to Noodler, and so he was tossed from one to another till he fell at the feet of the black pirate. All of the boys were plucked from their trees in this ruthless manner, and several of them were in the air at a time, like bales of goods flung from hand to hand. A different treatment was accorded to Wendy, who came last. With ironical politeness, Hook raised his hat to her and, offering her his arm, escorted her to the spot where the others were being gagged. He did it with such an air, he was so frightfully distinguished, that she was too fascinated to cry out. She was only a little girl. Perhaps it is a tell-tale to divulge that for a moment Hook entranced her, and we tell on her only because her slip led to strange results. had she haughtily unhanded him, and we should have loved to write it of her. She would have been hurled through the air like the others, and then Hook would probably not have been present at the tying of the children. And had he not been present at the tying of the children, he would not have discovered Slightly's secret, and without the secret he could not presently have made his foul attempt on Peter's life. They were tied to prevent their flying away, doubled up with their knees close to their ears, and for the trussing of them the black pirate had cut a rope into 9 equal pieces. All went well until Slightly's turn came, when he was found to be like those irritating parcels that use up all the string in going round and leave no tags with which to tie a knot. The pirates kicked him in their rage, just as you kick the parcel, though in fairness you should not. You should kick the string. And strange to say, it was Hook who told them to belay their violence. His lip was curled with malicious triumph, while his dogs were merely sweating because every time they tried to pack the unhappy lad tight in one part, he bulged out in another. Hook's mastermind had gone far beneath Slightly's surface, probing not for effects but for causes, and his exultance showed that he had found them. Slightly, white to the gills, knew that Hook had surprised his secret, which was this, that no boy so blown out could use a tree wherein an average man needed stick. Poor Slightly, most wretched of all the children now, for he was in a panic above bitterly regretting what he had done. Madly addicted to the drinking of water when he was hot, he had swelled in consequence to his present girth, and instead of reducing himself to fit his tree, he had, unknown to the others, whittled his tree to make it fit him. Sufficient of this, Hook guessed to persuade him that Peter at last lay at his mercy, but no word of the dark design that now formed in the subterranean caverns of his mind crossed his lips. He merely signed that the captives were to be conveyed to the ship, and that he would be alone. How to convey to them? Hunched up in their ropes, they might indeed be rolled down the hill like barrels, but most of the way lay through a morass. Again Hook's genius surmounted difficulties. He indicated that the little house must be used as a conveyance. The children were flung into it. 4 stout pirates raised it on their shoulders. The others fell in behind, and singing the hateful pirate chorus, the strange procession set off through the wood. I don't know whether any of the children were crying. If so, the singing drowned the sound. But as the little house disappeared in the forest, a brave though tiny jet of smoke issued from its chimney as if defying Hook. Hook saw it, and it did Peter a bad service. It dried up any trickle of pity for him that may have remained in the pirate's infuriated breast. The first thing he did on finding himself alone in the fast-falling night was to tiptoe to Slightly's tree and make sure that it provided him with a passage. Then for long he remained brooding, his hat of ill omen on the sward, so that a gentle breeze which had arisen might play refreshingly through his hair. Dark as were his thoughts, his blue eyes were as soft as the periwinkle. Intently he listened for any sound from the nether world, but all was as silent below as above. The house underground seemed to be but one more empty tenement in the void. Was that boy asleep, or did he stand waiting at the foot of Slightly's tree with his dagger in his hand? There was no way of knowing save by going down. Hook let his cloak slip softly to the ground, and then biting his lip till it lewd blood stood on them, he stepped into the tree. He was a brave man, but for a moment he had to stop there and wipe his brow, which was dripping like a candle. Then silently he let himself go into the unknown. He arrived unmolested at the foot of the shaft and stood still again, biting at his breath, which had almost left him. As his eyes became accustomed to the dim light, various objects in the home under the trees took shape. But the only one which his greedy gaze rested, long sought for and found at last, was the great bed. On the bed lay Peter, fast asleep. Unaware of the tragedy being enacted above, Peter had continued for a little time after the children left to play gaily on his pipes, no doubt rather a forlorn attempt to prove himself that he did not care. Then he decided not to take his medicine so as to grieve Wendy. Then he lay down on the bed outside the coverlet to vex her still more, for she had always tucked them inside it, because you never know that you may not grow chilly at the turn of the night. Then he nearly cried, but it struck him how indignant she would be if he laughed instead. So he laughed a haughty laugh and fell asleep in the middle of it. Sometimes, though not often, he had dreams, and they were more painful than the dreams of other boys. For hours he could not be separated from these dreams, though he wailed piteously in them. They had to do, I think, with the riddle of his existence. At such times it had been Wendy's custom to take him out of bed and sit with him on her lap, soothing him in dear ways of her own invention. And when he grew calmer, to put him back to bed before he quite woke up, so that he should not know of the indignity to which she had subjected him. But on this occasion he had fallen at once into a dreamless sleep. One arm dropped over the edge of the bed, one leg was arched, and the unfinished part of his laugh was stranded on his mouth, which was open, showing the little pearls. Thus defenseless Hook found him. Thus defenseless, Hook found him. He stood silent at the foot of the tree, looking across the chamber at his enemy. Did no feeling of compassion disturb his sombre breast? The man was not wholly evil. He loved flowers, I have been told, and sweet music. He was himself a mean performer on the harpsichord. And let it be frankly admitted, the idyllic nature of the scene stirred him profoundly. Mastered by his better self, he would have returned reluctantly up the tree but for one thing. What stayed him was Peter's impertinent appearance as he slept. The open mouth, the drooping arm, the arched knee, they were such a personification of cockiness as, taken together, will never again, one may hope, be presented to eyes so sensitive to their offensiveness. They steeled Hook's heart. If his rage had broken him into 100 pieces, every one of them would have disregarded the incident and leapt at the sleeper. Though a light from one lamp shone dimly on the bed, Hook stood in darkness himself, and at the first stealthy step forward he discovered an obstacle, the door of Slightly's tree. It did not entirely fill the aperture, and he had been looking over it, feeling for the catch. He found to his fury that it was low down beyond his reach. To his disordered brain it seemed then that the irritating quality in Peter's face and figure visibly increased, and he rattled the door and flung himself against it. Was his enemy to escape him after all? But what was that? The red in his eyes had caught sight of Peter's medicine standing on a ledge within easy reach. He fathomed what it was straightway, and immediately knew that the sleeper was in his power. Lest he should be taken alive, Hook always carried about him, his person, a dreadful poison, blended by himself of all the death-dealing rings that had come into his possession. These he had boiled down into a yellow liquid quite unknown to science, which was probably the most virulent poison in existence. 5 drops of this he now added to Peter's cup. His hand shook, but it was in exultation rather than in shame. As he did it, he avoided glancing at the sleeper, but not lest pity should unnerve him, merely to avoid spilling. Then one long, gloating look he cast upon his victim, and turning, wormed his way with difficulty back up the tree. Okie doke, another 3-minute break. We are currently at 2 hours and 17 minutes. We could pause here. It would be a good place to pause. Or we could keep going. I see that there are suspected to be about 5 people present. I don't know how many of you are actually me know with a 1 or a 2. 1 for keep going and 2 for let's turn in the chat, and we'll go from there. I'm still here, says Arame. That's good. And be done for the night. Okay. I don't see anyone else dropping in their thought. So if that is the case, I will close up and we will come back to the rest of the story tomorrow. Or perhaps something else tomorrow. And we'll do a regular volume reading. Although a couple times, admittedly, I probably wasn't whispering. Your spouse has been lurking, so he has no thought on the matter, is my assumption. I am so glad that you're here, darling. Either way, nice. Excellent. Okay. Let me see really quickly who isn't doing something fun. Try to tune in. I appreciate you, Anime, very much. Let's see. There is our raid call. And thank you again, everyone, for coming and listening. And we will all see each other hopefully tomorrow. Make sure to take your meds if you haven't taken them. Drink your water. Give your kitty and puppy and other delightful friends a little kiss on the forehead from me. We're gonna go and wander into Pisces stream. See you there.